Hey everyone, and welcome to part 2 of Deep Dive episode 2. The song is Tearful Confession, and part 2 is all about melody. Now, we're going to do the same thing as we did before, meaning that we're going to look at 3 different ways to build a melody. First way is using the parent scale, which in this case is the natural minor scale. That is also called diatonic, which means that whatever we do, we're always in the B natural minor scale. The second way, we're focusing on chord tones. So we're not too worried about being inside B minor all the time, but more about hitting the chord tones. And the third way is notes or a group of notes that are taking us somewhere, that on their own don't even try and sound all that pleasant. The point is to take us from one place to another. Now, in the harmony part, we talked about harmonic minor. Now that we're in the melody part, we can talk about melodic minor and where it comes from. Now, this is the harmonic minor. And what it is the natural minor scale, but with the leading tone, which is the 7th. This is what we talked about in the harmony part. Okay? Now, this harmonic minor has a very, very recognizable sound. Kind of a very angular sound. And all of us guitar players love that sound, right? And there's no need to change that sound. However, sometimes you might want to change that sound in order to be something else. And what really contributes to that angular sound is this half step and then this 1.5 step jump. Okay? Now, how do we get rid of that and still keep the leading tone in? Well, one way is to take the 6 and bring that up a half step so that it's the natural 6 again. So it sounds like this. See that? You almost don't even notice it. It almost feels the same as this. So what melodic minor does is it smoothens out that very harmonic minor thing. Now, we all, of course, love the sound of harmonic minor. But if you want to explore other sounds, the melodic minor is a nice place to look at. And there are different ways of using that, but the reason it's called a melodic minor is because it's a way to smoothen out the melody. It's a lot smoother sound. Originally, it was made for that purpose, but later on, people started to use that for chords as well. And in this song, we're not really using melodic minor to build chords, but we are using it in the melody quite a lot. So, let's start looking at the song. Now, we're in B minor, and we're starting on the 5. Now I'm going to do the same thing as I did before, in that I'm going to talk a lot about chord tones. So we're starting on the 5. And right there we're having a chromatic approach to the 5. I can give you the same thing so that I'm staying diatonic. But it's not the same, right? There's a lot of nice spice and pressure in the chromatic approaches. And then we're just sliding from the B, which is the 1, back to the 5. now this time the same note as before all of a sudden is a chord tone because we're hitting the G sharp diminished. In a diminished seventh, we actually call this a double flat 7, but that's semantics again. We can call it a 6. Either one works fine. But it's a chord tone nonetheless. Then that's all very much inside B minor and fits the E minor perfectly. Same thing here. Very much inside B minor, also fits the F sharp perfectly. A little bit of a chromatic approach again. And this is a chord tone for the C sharp. Then we're doing the same melody an octave down, and we're hitting the 5 again, right? Here. So the same approach. Then we get this nice chromatic descending. And on the chord tone again. So the same thing. Then we go up the B minor. Very much inside B minor. So the same thing, all is very much inside B minor and everything is nicely hitting the chord tones. So far everything is right within B minor. Then here we are starting to look at this melodic minor thing, which is, remember, it's the 6. So this is the note that we're hitting. And what we have in the harmony there is the 5 to a 5. Remember the C sharp 7. And this note happens to be a chord tone. And it's the 5 of the chord. So the 6 here is the 5 of the 5 to the 5. Confused yet? Sorry, just had to say that. So it's the 5th of the chord. Don't worry about the rest. We talked about that in the harmony part. Anyway, melodic minor. Ain't that nice? We can really rest on the note. So there we are really using the melodic minor. Then we're shifting to the G sharp, right? And we're hitting the 3, the minor third of the chord, and then the flat 7. So it's all very much inside, right? Then we go. That's not as inside the G sharp minor, but it's the major 7 of the G sharp minor. So since the chord is it's the major 7. And a nice little chromatic enclosure back to the 3rd. Right, hitting the 7 again. This time we're hitting the 3rd up high. Then we go a 3rd again. A 5. The sus4, right? And hitting the 3. Here we are really circling around this note, which in the C sharp, it's the minor third, and in the E, with the B in the bass, is the 1. It's all also very much inside the G sharp minor. And this one happens to be a 7 of the A sharp minor 7, flat 5. So we're going up to the sharp 5, but we're resolving it into the 5. So makes sense. So it's a little bit of a suspension inside the chord. Next comes this phrase that repeats. So there the notes remain the same, but the chord changes. So at first we're hitting, it's a third, just coming from down below. Then we're hitting the 7th, coming from below again. Then that's why I've marked it down as a D sharp 7 flat 9 sharp 5, because the melody is really taking a part of the chord there. So if in the G sharp this was the 3rd, in the C sharp this was the minor 7th, then in the D sharp this is the sharp 5, and then we resolve it to the 5. That's why the name is pretty big there, but there's a reason for it, okay? And then we're hitting the 1 of the G sharp minor. Okay, next section. We're kind of doing the same thing. I put the melody on a different string because that's where I get it to sound the best. But you can put it anywhere. So the same kind of thing is going on. So all is very much inside B minor with the chromatic approach, and then when we finally really land on it, it's the chord tone of the G sharp diminished, which is here. And then go up the B minor. Very much inside, and the same chromatic thing happens here again. And then we get to the first fast thing. So what's going on here is we have this little cell. So if here's the B, so here's your root, here's your B minor arpeggio, and we have this little shape that works around it. And we're just going the shape straight down and back up. And we repeat the same thing, but don't take the lowest note. So it's a small neighborhood that you can kind of circle around there. So not every note has to be some kind of scale or something like that. Sometimes you can have a bunch of notes that create a lot of energy. And some of them fit, some of them don't, but the line itself is so strong that you don't mind. You could analyze every single note like, oh, here's a 5, flat 5, 4, flat 3, 2, flat 2, but that's not the point. The point is the concept of this little neighborhood, okay? Let's keep going. Then we're back on the 5 again, and the harmony is the same. then comes this thing. Now here we can talk a little bit about this scale that is called the Hirajoshi or Hirajoshi. It has a lot of names and it doesn't really matter what you call it. The point is the intervals. And that's the thing that I think is very important to understand, in that Marty doesn't think in scales. He's definitely looked at stuff like this, but what is taken away from all of that is the intervals. And Marty is an expert on intervals. He knows all the intervals on the guitar in every single place of the neck.
The idea is to know where your roots are. Obviously, once you're advanced, you want to know where all the intervals are.
And he doesn't need to know a lot of scale shapes and stuff like that, because he's very aware of what interval he's on. And that's one of his specialties. That's one thing that he's very good at. And the intervals for this Hirajoshi scale is 1, 2, flat 3, a 5, and a flat 6. So it is the natural minor scale, but we're taking 2 notes out. And the 2 notes that we're taking out is the 4 and the 7. So you can figure out fingerings for a scale like this if you want to, or you can use the same stuff you know, but try and be aware of the interval that you're at. So the kind of scale shape that we're using here is this. I have all the scale shapes of the Hirajoshi on my Patreon. If you join, you can get them for free. They're also in the shop. And here's one of the fingerings that really works for it. Okay, so what we're doing is, and then, so everything was really inside it, right? Except for this, right? There's a little chromatic, but other than that, it's all very much inside those intervals. On the recording, there's a bit of an open string thing going on, so there's a bit of noise happening, but that was the closest thing I could discern from it. Okay. Next up, again, we're going up the B minor, and then we have this chromatic. So it's all very much inside the pentatonic box, right? We're just going chromatically up and down. All very much inside the B minor. And then, again, the chord is a C sharp 7, and we get to use the melodic minor. And then we're going chromatically up to the 6 again, right? So this song is a beautiful use of the melodic minor. Next up, it's a bit of a jumbled mess here, but there are 2 guitars an octave apart. I'll show you the higher one. So in this section, everything is very much inside the B minor. And when we start the next phrase, we just have a little arpeggio here. And then comes this fast part, and it's like this. So let's look at that in little cells. So in the first part, the main note that we're hitting is this, which is the 5. So the notes above the 5 are a flat 7 and a natural 6. So that makes it a Dorian, which is a fine thing to use. But again, that's not the way Marty thinks. Marty thinks in intervals. So he is using the 6 and the flat 7. And this happens to be a little chromatic approach to the 5 again. Or you can think of it as a blue note as well, like in the blue scale. So. And then very much in. Then the blue again. So apart from this thing on top, this all is very much diatonic. Then we get these little trills. Then the same kind of chromatic approach. And we go up to the B7. And we're really hitting the 1 of the chord. And that's the 3rd of the E minor. So what's going on here is we're targeting this note, which is the C sharp, which is the 1 of the chord. And on the G string, we're very much inside. And then we get this chromatic, right? And then we're going from here, the C sharp, into the next chord tone, which is here, the F sharp. And all of these notes here are fair game. Makes sense? Then back to the B minor. All very much inside B minor, and we're landing on the B. Then the chord turns into a B7, and we get to use this diminished run. So here's another concept that we still haven't talked about, but Marty uses a lot, which is using a diminished over a dominant chord. And how that works is when we have a B7 like here, we can use a diminished arpeggio starting from a fret higher, meaning that we can use a C diminished arpeggio here. Now, diminished arpeggios are symmetrical, meaning that everything repeats 3 frets higher and 3 frets lower, and it goes on forever. So you can go the same shape, I'm just moving it around. So what that means is that we can have the same pattern, which happens to be this, and we can just slide it down 3 frets. And 3 frets again. Okay, we could go on that forever. But we're doing it for a short while here, so that much. Then we get to the next section, which is this clean section. All very much inside. And remember, we're about to go into the B major, so we're really hitting the major 3rd here. Then as the chords are going to be a B major and an F sharp minor. And then we're playing a line that really emphasizes those. So the first one is a B major 7 arpeggio. It has a 4 there in between. And then we slide down to an F sharp minor. And then we just slide into a chord tone. And now we are in the B major section, right? Very much chord tones. Again, the same thing. This is the chord tone. These two are the chromatic approaches. And this one again is a nice chord tone. Then we go all very much inside the B major scale. And we're really emphasizing the F sharp major. So this is the shape that we're in. And then when we shift to the G sharp major, we could go here, but instead we're basing our thinking here. So from F sharp to G sharp. Now from here on out, because we're about to go to the C sharp major, we're actually already playing the C sharp major scale on the top two strings. So it's right, so all of those fit the C sharp perfectly. And the very highest note that we're hitting here is actually the 9 of the C sharp. So we're going. So it's a small suspension that's happening, but it feels so good. Then the F sharp, we have a similar kind of suspension. Right? Then comes the A sharp. Everything is very much inside the C sharp major. Even while there's a 4 minor, it doesn't affect the melody. That's all very C sharp major. So here's the 1. At the very top, we're hitting the C sharp, which we were in a C sharp major key. And now we're shifting to a C sharp minor. And the note that they have in common is, of course, the C sharp itself. And then we are on the outro, which is the C sharp minor. So the first note is the C sharp. Then on the A minor, that's all very much A minor. Then the G sharp minor. Very much chord tones. And this note here is the 3rd of the A sharp diminished. Then F sharp. very much chord tones, and this is the leading tone. And at the very end, we get to use the melodic minor again. And we end the song on the leading tone, which is the chord tone of the G-sharp 7. And we could resolve it to the C-sharp minor, but we don't. We leave it hanging. And that's fine. So the song definitely doesn't resolve at the very end. And it doesn't have to. That's a great sound to kind of leave some kind of mystery to the song. That is it, my friends. That is looking at the melody of Tearful Confession. If you want to support what I do, you can find me on Patreon and tell me which songs you would like to see covered and or analyzed. But thank you very much for watching, and hope to see you again. All right, bye.